Russia's leader lies. He obfuscates. Putin does everything that he can to hide Russians away from the fact that hundreds of thousands of their friends and their family members have been killed or injured due to his desire to control Ukraine. And now Putin is going so far as to disguise dead Russian soldiers as dead Ukrainians. The reality is that Putin is afraid to admit the true scale of Russia's losses in Ukraine. If he does, he will be admitting that he already lost the war, if not in the tangible sense, then at least in terms of what Russia believed Putin's war was really about. On June 21st, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky provided some interesting information about a recent exchange of the bodies of dead soldiers between Russia and Ukraine. These exchanges, which have been carried out several times during the Russian invasion, are one of the few marks of respect Putin gives to his Ukrainian adversaries. At least they were. Now, as we've seen so many other times during this war, Putin has exposed his callous and uncaring nature. How? By sending the bodies of Russian soldiers disguised as dead Ukrainians to Ukraine. During a briefing in which he reported on the body exchange, Zelensky said that Putin has now started using the return of the war dead as yet another of his manipulation tools. This time, it's all about obscuring the sheer scale of Russia's losses from his own people. Per the Kyiv Independent, which was present at the briefing, Zelensky said, "Sometimes these bodies even have Russian passports." Zelensky went on to claim that there has even been a case of an Israeli soldier being sent back to Ukraine as a Ukrainian soldier. That Israeli fighter, who appears to have joined Russia as a mercenary, is now remembered as little more than another attempt by Putin to manipulate the figures. Putin is afraid to admit how many people have died, Zelensky added, because if the moment comes when he needs to mobilize, his society will be afraid. We'll come back to that point later in the video. AP News also reported on Zelensky's remarks, noting that Ukraine's president said that at least 20 of the bodies Ukraine received in its most recent army dead exchange are confirmed to have been Russian soldiers. They threw the corpses of their citizens at us, AP News reports Zelensky is saying. This is their attitude toward war, toward their soldiers, and this is already documented. Sometimes, these bodies even have Russian passports. Already documented. That comment suggests that this isn't the first time Putin has dressed up dead Russians as Ukrainians. It's happened before, all as Putin attempts to hide the sheer scale of the losses his country has experienced from his own people. The most recent exchange comes in the wake of a series of negotiations held between Russia and Ukraine in Istanbul. Those negotiations, which were intended to bring the two countries closer to a peace agreement, had no other tangible results beyond the army dead exchange. And even that was shrouded in controversy. Ukraine and Russia agreed to exchange the bodies of their fallen in a 6,000 for 6,000 format, though Ukraine pointed out that this number was too high. Not enough time was given to conduct forensic examinations of the dead, Ukraine said, which could lead to problems with identification. Putin appears to have taken advantage of that fact. By forcing a fast exchange, he's been able to hide Russian soldiers as Ukrainians until they reached Ukraine itself. Only then did his deception unravel. There are also discrepancies in the numbers that have emerged. According to the Kyiv Independent, Russia sent 6,057 bodies of fallen soldiers to Ukraine. In contrast, Ukraine was only able to send 78. This isn't a sign that Ukraine isn't killing Russian soldiers, as the Kremlin is sure to claim. As explained by Zelensky, the reason that it couldn't send 6,000 dead Russian soldiers back as part of the exchange is simple. They were advancing, and their dead remained in the territory where they were. In other words, Russia's dead are predominantly already in Russian hands. At least they're on territory within Ukraine that Russia currently occupies, meaning Ukraine would have to fight through Russian forces to claim the dead before sending them back to Russia. The BBC confirmed these numbers in its June 16th report on the repatriation effort, adding that Russia has also taken steps to complicate the identification process. It quoted Ukraine's Interior Minister Ihor Klimenko, who said, "Bodies are returned in an extremely mutilated state. Parts of the same bodies are in different bags." Again, we see Putin attempting to obfuscate the truth. By returning the Ukrainian dead in such a mutilated state, he's potentially hiding even more Russians who have been killed, in addition to showing complete disrespect for his enemy. The Kyiv Independent also notes that Klimenko has confirmed that Ukraine earlier discovered that a soldier named Alexander Viktorovich Bugayev returned to Ukraine was actually Russian. He was a member of Russia's 39th Separate Guards Motorized Rifle Brigade. This shows how little human life means to Russia, or maybe it's just a way to avoid paying compensation to the families. But they will have to pay anyway. We are returning these bodies, said Klimenko. Do you remember how we mentioned these kinds of exchanges were one of the few signs of respect Putin showed to Ukraine? Scratch that. He's using them to further his agenda, just as he uses everything else related to the terrible war he started. That brings us to the reason why Putin is attempting this ridiculous trickery, with the first one having already been mentioned in the video. Russia wants to hide the true scale of its casualties. How massive Russia's casualty rate is depends on the source used to determine it. Mediazona reports that 111,387 Russian soldiers are confirmed to have been killed, with 1,762 being added to its numbers between May 23rd and June 6th. Those reports are backed by an examination of Russia's probate registry, which Mediazona, along with the BBC, uses to confirm the names of Russian soldiers who have been killed in action. Even then, the 111,387 figure is an estimate. Mediazona says that as many as 165,000 Russian soldiers may have been killed, with some probate entries providing too few details for a full confirmation. Instead, that figure comes from an examination of excess mortality among Russian men based on the probate registry data the organization has received. More worrying figures, from Putin's perspective, come from other sources. For instance, Ukraine's Ministry of Finance says that Russia has officially broken the 1 million barrier when it comes to casualties. It says that Russia has lost 1,012,500 soldiers up to June 23rd, though it's not clear how many of those soldiers have been killed versus those who are injured or in captivity. Regardless, such a massive casualty rate suggests that the true number of Russia's dead is likely much higher than the Mediazona figure, which feeds into Ukraine's comments about Putin wanting to obscure the number of Russian dead with his most recent exchange. Putin simply doesn't want his people to know the sheer scale of Russia's losses in his ill-fated invasion. Another estimate comes from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, which said earlier in June that a high of 250,000 Russian soldiers have died in Ukraine, with over 950,000 Russian casualties. Those numbers roughly align with the figures provided by Ukraine's Ministry of Finance. It's also notable that the CSIS report was published on June 3rd, 20 days before the Ministry of Finance's figures. It's feasible that Russia has since lost over 50,000 more soldiers to break the million mark. Interestingly, Russia may have also unwittingly provided some insight into how many soldiers it lost. On June 19th, Russian ambassador to the UK, Andrei Kelin, sat down with CNN for an interview. During that discussion, Kelin said many of the things you would expect a Putin mouthpiece to say, including that Russia will continue this drive and Ukraine will have to surrender. However, the Kyiv Independent reports that Kelin also let something slip that Putin wouldn't have wanted the rest of the world to know. Though he dismissed the 1 million casualties Ukraine claims to have inflicted on Russia as a fabrication, he did say that about 600,000 Russian soldiers were currently fighting in Ukraine. Therein lies the interesting point. Back in June 2024, Putin claimed that 700,000 soldiers were fighting in Ukraine, according to the Kyiv Independent. In December 2023, the number was 617,000. Here's where it gets interesting. Based on Kelin's own numbers, Russia's recruitment drives should have led to 250,000 soldiers being sent to the front lines since the beginning of 2025. That would give a total of up to 950,000 Russian soldiers in Ukraine based on Putin's June 2024 figures, yet somehow, Russia's total number of soldiers has dropped lower than the 2023 figure of 617,000, according to Kelin. How could Russia have fewer soldiers in Ukraine despite having recruited so many? The only answer seems to be that Russia has lost tens, if not hundreds of thousands of soldiers despite recruiting so heavily. Whichever of these sources is most accurate, the reality Putin faces is that he's lost far too many Russian soldiers in his Ukraine invasion. He's now hiding the bodies of Russians among the Ukrainian dead because he knows the scale of that loss could come back to bite him if he tries to do something that would ensure even more Russian troops come flooding into Ukraine, mobilize. Zelensky already touched on this when noting that Russia is hiding its dead among Ukrainians because Putin fears mobilization. This isn't a new fear. Back in September 2024, Euromaidan Press reported that Putin fears the societal backlash that would arise if he announced a full mobilization in Russia. It quoted the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, which said at the time, "Mobilization in Russia remains unlikely in the near to medium term due to Putin's personal fear that mobilization is a direct threat to his regime's stability." In other words, Russia being forced to mobilize so deep into the Ukraine war would be seen as an admission on Putin's part that he's lost too many of the country's soldiers. Russian society as a whole would see that its supposed strongman leader, this great military tactician, has been lying to them. The war of attrition hasn't been weakening Ukraine, at least not to the extent that Putin and his cronies claim. Instead, it's been eating away at the male population of Russia to such an extent that Putin has to force even more to join the fight. The ISW's position on Putin's mobilization crisis hasn't changed much since September 2024. On May 9th, it made similar comments on mobilization. The Kremlin is projecting the narrative of a powerful Russia and a powerful Russian President Vladimir Putin to conceal the real weaknesses and limitations of Russia's capabilities and distract from Russia's battlefield failures, it said in a report published on that date. Putin believes that any admission of weakness would be lethal to the regime he's created, which revolves around his ability to project strength. Mobilization shows that Russia isn't as strong as Putin claims it to be. So Russia's leader is hiding the bodies of his country's dead among Ukraine's in a vain effort to hide the death tally of the Ukraine war from his people. But there are other reasons. Earlier we mentioned Klimenko's comments about how Putin may be hiding Russian bodies with the Ukrainian dead to avoid paying compensation to the families of those dead Russians. That's a good point. The cost of compensation has been staggering for the Russian regime. In January 2023, AA reported that Putin had signed a decree stating that Russia would commit to paying $68,000 to the families of deceased soldiers, with $41,300 being paid to the families of the injured. Based on these numbers, Business Insider said in July 2024, Russia would need to dedicate 6% of its entire $414 billion budget to this compensation scheme in 2024 alone, amounting to $26 billion being paid out to the families of dead and injured soldiers. That's huge. And we can do some maths of our own to see the scale of the compensation burden that now faces Russia. Let's assume the CSIS figure of 250,000 Russian dead is accurate. That would mean that Russia has paid out around $17.2 billion in compensation to the families of its dead soldiers alone. Of course, that assumes that Russia is actually making those payments and isn't hiding the true number of dead from its people. We can go further. Ukraine's Ministry of Finance claims that Russia has experienced 1,012,500 casualties. Subtracting 250,000 from that leaves us with 762,500. We don't have a figure for the number of Russians that have been captured by Ukraine, so let's round the remaining casualties down to 700,000. It's likely that 62,500 Russian soldiers are in Ukrainian captivity, but that only adds to the point we're about to make. Payouts of $41,300 made to the families of injured soldiers amount to $28.91 billion. Add the $17.2 billion paid to the families of the dead Russian soldiers to that number, and you get a staggering $46.11 billion in casualty payouts since the Ukraine war began. That's huge. It represents billions of dollars Putin could be spending to prop up his country's faltering economy or delivering new weapons to the battlefield. When we're talking about that kind of money, it makes sense why Putin is trying such dirty tricks as hiding Russian bodies in with the bodies of Ukrainian soldiers. In the most recent case, that amounts to 20 fewer soldiers for whom Russia has to make payouts. How far has Putin taken this trickery? How many Russian families haven't received the money Putin's regime promised them? We may never know, and the odds are that Putin will never let us know because the strongman image the ISW says he wants to protect is far too important to his regime. There's another reason why Russia is trying to hide its dead among Ukrainian soldiers. It relates directly to the mobilization issue, and is something that the world has realized since Putin started delaying every effort to create a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia. Putin doesn't want this war to end, and he doesn't care whether or not the Russian people support him. That support is already being called into question. In January 2025, The New Yorker published an article in which it reported on the world of a Russian collective called Public Sociology Laboratory. Members of that group traveled to 3 different regions across Russia during the summer and fall of 2023 to gauge the true Russian appetite for Putin's war. Interviews the researchers held told a very different story to reports in Russian media, which has portrayed propaganda in which old ladies make portraits out of Putin with tin cans along with staggering support for the Russian president. When people actually spoke about the war, it's clear none of them expected it to happen. I heard somewhere that it was going to happen on February 16th, one 40-year-old woman told her interviewer. But everyone thought it was a joke, that it wouldn't really happen, that it was American propaganda. Another interview subject simply said, "It's just surreal, it shouldn't be this way." Later, one of the study's researchers, whom The New Yorker gives the pseudonym Masha, returned to the location where she originally held these interviews. There, she found that pro-war events were being cancelled, with those that went ahead supposedly being poorly attended. Again, the message was that many in Russia either don't support Putin's war or are at least indifferent to it. A silent sort of rejection, perhaps, among a group of people who may fear speaking out directly due to the fear of retaliation. How much of the real Russian attitude do these snippets of poor support showcase? It's always difficult to tell in Russia, where propaganda reigns and dissent is subdued. Still, we have hints that Putin's public isn't as enraptured by their leader as he would like the world to believe. Think about what this means for his Ukraine war. Politico says that we're asking the wrong question if we ask how to get Putin to walk away from Ukraine. He won't. On June 9th, Newsweek reported that Moscow's latest demand before it would consider peace is for NATO to scale back its eastern flank. That's not going to happen, and Putin knows it. NATO sees Russia as too much of a threat to weaken itself. All signs point to Putin wanting to continue the war no matter the casualty rate. All of this matters because hiding the bodies of dead Russians means that Putin can continue lying to his people. The seeds of waning support might not grow if the true information isn't available, Putin seems to be thinking. As with the mobilization issue, Putin is hiding the truth from his people because he can't allow them to see him as weak. His regime would topple if they did. And that brings us to the last reason Russia is hiding its dead: propaganda. Ukraine hinted at this when revealing that Russia was sending Ukraine its own dead, and it's been a problem throughout the war. Putin and his cronies lie about everything. In September 2024, Ukrinform reported that Russia goes as far as to fake screenshots and social media posts to feed its ongoing disinformation campaign. It points to one incident in which Russia attacked an educational institution in Poltava, which left 55 people dead and 328 injured after 2 ballistic missiles touched down, according to Ukraine's Interior Ministry. In the immediate aftermath of the attack, Ukrinform says, Kremlin-run media outlets and pro-war Russian Telegram accounts started telling a different story. They claimed that 190 people were killed in the Poltava missile strike, which included a large number of dead defenders. That was all fake. There were no statements from Ukraine that confirmed Russia's claim of 190 dead. From this incident, we see Putin's pattern on a small scale. Russia's leader, along with the Kremlin, instructs exaggeration of Ukraine's death counts while hiding Russia's away from view. The 20 hidden Russian soldiers among Ukraine's dead are just another example of a much wider propaganda campaign. Lie, trick, deceive. Do whatever it takes to hide the true toll the Ukraine war has taken on Russia and its military. The smoke screens are dissipating. Putin's lies are unraveling. For Putin, the stark reality he hides from his people is that Russia has already lost the Ukraine war. Granted, Russia continues to fight and take territory, but it's lost any ability to claim that Putin's invasion hasn't destroyed the world's perception of Russia as one of the world's strongest countries. Russia also can't hide the nature of these losses from its people for much longer. The losses are too great. The numbers are coming out. Little tricks like hiding Russian soldiers among Ukraine's dead are just the last gasps of a regime that knows it's teetering on the edge of a cliff and is about to fall. And it's not just casualties that Putin has to worry about. Ukraine is stepping up its battle against Russia by developing its own long-range missiles that will bring Putin's war back to his people. Discover the Sapsan and what it means for the Ukraine war in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show if you want more up-to-date coverage of the latest developments in the Ukraine war. And thank you, as always, for watching.